When I look at the Anacostia River, I see a really beautiful river that has a lot of problems. When I was shooting this project on the Anacostia, they had a huge hurricane that didn't come near here. It went up to the northeast, but the Anacostia was really, really low. What did that do? Well, it revealed all this trash in the bed of the river that I came out early morning and late evening and photographed that trash because it was revealed.
For many, this river is home. Home to people, home to fish, and to birds. But also home to a long, dark history of neglect and abuse. Today, the Anacostia River is one of the most polluted and urbanized waterways in the United States. It's a dumping ground for trash, industrial toxins, sewage, and polluted stormwater. The Anacostia drains 167 square miles of land inside and surrounding the District of Columbia. It travels 8.5 miles through forest, wetlands, suburbs, and urban centers until it joins the Potomac River. The hope is that the Anacostia will be cleaned up enough so that it's swimmable and fishable by the year 2025. That's an enormous challenge because of the Anacostia's notorious history. Today, a lot of good is happening along the Anacostia. As the extent of the river's abuse and neglect over the years has been revealed, an energized momentum of progress is emerging among individuals and groups committed to cleaning it up. The question is, will it all work together to truly clean up the Anacostia? Trey Sherrod is the Anacostia Riverkeeper. He knows a lot is at stake here.
When we talk about environmental justice, it's sort of unfortunate. We almost always talk about environmental injustice instead. River Terrace, to this day, people that came up there are still suffering from asthma, cancer, and learning disability at a higher rate than not only the national average, but the national average for people already living in cities.
Serious health issues have been documented among people living near the Anacostia. Many of them are caused by the high number of polluters along the Anacostia River, like highway traffic, oil-fired power plant emissions, and a large dump located on the river banks. It's there that DC's garbage was regularly burned. Many of these toxins and carcinogens gathered in the Anacostia community, in the fish that people ate, in the air that people breathed, and in the waters where they played as children.
You can see that in people. That story is written in people's health to this very day. This is an urban river. This is conservation for people's sake.
I can't imagine having grown up not swimming in my bodies of water. But they're not allowed to swim in their waterways, and that's just ridiculous to me. The Anacostia Riverkeeper wants a fishable, swimmable Anacostia River. The way we get to fishable is not as quick and as easy as swimmable. Stop putting human waste into the river. That one's pretty simple. Fishable, we're not dealing with things that are entering the river now, per se. We're dealing with things that are legacy toxics. You know, that's a really heavy problem. That stuff is buried in the mud. It's spread out across 8.5 miles of tidal river, not to mention all the tributaries where there's different hot spots. So this is a really hard problem.
Ooh, so this place probably got 20 sparrows in it. I'll probably flush at least half of them and not be able to put my binoculars on them. But they hunker down.
For Marty Hastings, the Anacostia means a chance to get close to nature. She's a regular bird watcher and frequents the wetlands along the river. As a science teacher, she brought her students here on several field trips.
I've taken kids out into nature and seen how much they enjoy it. I mean, I've never seen a kid that didn't like it. I really haven't. I've never seen a kid bored. They don't even know that they're missing it until they get here. And then they go, well, when are we coming back? I feel sad that kids that live around here, this is their place to explore. And they're not going to get that because of what has happened to this river. I guess I'm lucky because, you know, I grew up in Florida. I lived on a creek, and I didn't have to worry about contamination. I didn't have to worry about it. And so I would, you know, walk by the creek, and I just felt an adventure. I felt like I was an explorer. For me, coming out here is an adventure. I don't care if you're an adult, you know, or you're a kid, you still get excited. And it's just cool. It's very cool.
Dennis Chestnut has lived near the Anacostia River most of his life. For him, cleaning it up has become his life's work.
This particular area where we're located, I've been coming here for many decades. Originally, this was an area I used to come to as a child along with a lot of my young friends. This was our beach, and we loved it. I learned how to swim here, and when I did get to a swimming pool, I think I was a little better swimmer as a result of learning to do it in the river. Having grown up in this community and coming to this same area and to this river as a child, and then coming back now and seeing the conditions of how polluted it is, especially with all of this visible pollution, you know, really makes me more anxious to do the work to help restore the health and clean it up.
Dennis is a member of Groundwork DC, an organization working to restore the Anacostia. One of the group's priorities is cleaning up trash in the water.
Today we're going to clean out the Kenilworth Park Bandalong litter trap. We started this process in late 2010. And at that time, this Kenilworth Park litter trap was the first litter capturing device of its kind in the whole Western Hemisphere. The river is the way it is today for a number of reasons. Rooftops and roadways are one of the major contributors.
This litter trap is a very effective tool for cleaning up the Anacostia. As its name implies, it basically traps floating litter in the river and holds it until it's collected for proper disposal. Dennis and his colleagues are here regularly to clean them out. He says it's stormwater that carries much of this trash into the Anacostia.
One of the things that development brought was a lot of impervious surfaces, concrete, asphalt, you name it, all of those things, where whenever there was storms or rainfall, there was no other alternative other than that water running off. And when it runs off, it carries all of the things that are captured from the rooftops of buildings, from roadways and sidewalks, and that runs off into the stormwater system and ultimately winds up in the river.
Everyone is talking about the cleanup of the Anacostia River. If we look over here, we see a tremendous amount of trash along the river.
Bill Matazeski writes a monthly column for East of the River newspaper. When he retired as the director of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, he focused his energy on the Anacostia River and its cleanup. He has observed another source of the river's litter problem.
This portion of the Anacostia is tidal, and also that the Potomac River, into which it flows just a mile or so below us here, the Potomac River had very high levels. When I looked into it, I started asking people, and they said, well, the trash problem is really under control upriver. It turned out that this trash is coming from the Potomac. This is the river that was supposed to be the decrepit, old, beat-up river, and it's now getting cleaned up, and it's the Potomac River, and with the tides, this stuff probably came from Alexandria, Virginia, came sweeping up the river and into here, and it's our trash now.
The Anacostia River's problems have a long history. 200 years before Congress moved to Washington, the area was well known by indigenous tribes. The name Anacostia has its roots in the native word Anacosh, meaning village trading center. But in the 1600s, English settlers arrived in the region, took control of the region's resources, and created the English settlement of Anacostia. Plantation owners cut down the dense forests to make way for tobacco farms, and they used slave labor to work them. By the early 18th century, about half of the population of Prince George's County were enslaved Africans. Over time, large-scale development along the river's banks caused erosion, washing soil into the Anacostia River. That turned the river into a sediment-filled flood zone, at points only inches deep. Abuse and neglect of the Anacostia River continued into the 20th century.
Well, where we're located is Kenilworth Park. The city, which was under total federal control at that time, determined this area to be where they could create a landfill, a dump. Why here? Well, it wasn't because people didn't live here. People lived in the communities that border this landfill. But the people who were residing in these areas did not also have a lot of value as far as the city was concerned. And therefore, this was one of those places that they felt could be a dump site.
But some of the trash, garbage, and toxins in the dump that were covered with soil to create Kenilworth Park have leached into the river. Tests have found high levels of heavy metals and other industrial toxins in the Anacostia. Perhaps most notable of these toxins are known carcinogens, PCB and PAH, which scientists say are dangerous to wildlife and human health. Many of these carcinogens are endocrine disruptors. These chemicals, often found in household cleaners, contribute to a well-documented phenomenon in finfish called intersex.
Catfish just so happen to be the canary in the mine when it comes to that, because catfish are bottom feeders. Catfish at one point in the river were both sex, male and female, because of the hormonal changes that some of those chemicals created. There's been a fishing moratorium on the river, and people are recommended to not consume the fish.
The moratorium is designed to prevent toxins from moving up the food chain. It's particularly challenging for community members who rely on the river for food. While industrial pollution has plagued the river for decades, perhaps the most grievous offense is by the city itself. When rain falls in a city like the District of Columbia, one with a combined sewer system, the rainwater flows from the streets to the storm drains. DC's storm drain system doesn't separate stormwater and sewage with two networks of pipes. Instead, this antiquated system carries stormwater and the sewage coming from homes and offices. This is only a problem when there's heavy rainfall. Still, DC experiences raw sewage overflows at an alarming rate. They're called combined sewage overflows, or CSOs. As a result of this infrastructure failure, sewage is dumped each year into the Anacostia River. It's a major health hazard for anyone who's exposed to fecal coliform or other harmful bacteria carried to the river in the sewage.
There's untreated human sewage going into the Anacostia River. Used to be to the tune of about 2.5 billion gallons a year, billion with a B. It's not the number of toilets flushing in the city that's driving these overflows. It's the rainfall on hard surfaces. In 1972, they made it illegal to swim in Rock Creek, the Potomac, and the Anacostia within the district boundaries. So by 1972, the problem was sufficiently known that they actually made a law banning swimming in the natural bodies of water in DC. Why they didn't deal with it in those years, I don't know. I would presume some combination of cost. Think they don't have money. No one sued them yet. Pick any of those.
But the river's problems became too big to ignore.
PEPCO, the Potomac Electric Power Company, is one of 5 major polluters to the Anacostia River. They had like a lagoon of toxic soup right off of the grounds of the facility, and it leached into the river for decades.
In 1999, the Anacostia Watershed Society sued the District of Columbia Water and Sewer Authority. They said the city was violating the Clean Water Act by not stopping polluters. Courts ruled D.C. Water did violate the Clean Water Act. In 2005, a consent decree was issued by the courts. As a result, D.C. Water is busy constructing 3 massive tunnels that will carry overflow sewage and stop 2 billion gallons of raw sewage from overflowing into the Anacostia, Potomac, and Rock Creek rivers every year. They're scheduled to be completed in 2030. The tunnel protecting the Anacostia is the first and largest of the 3. In 2018, D.C. Water began constructing a segment of the tunnel called CSO-19, just south of RFK Stadium. More than 100 feet below the surface, the tunnel is 23 feet in diameter and will end at the Blue Plains Wastewater Treatment Plant, one of the largest in the country. Blue Plains uses huge turbines to pump sewage and wastewater through a series of screens, removing large materials. It also filters out fats, oils, grease, and other solid particles. It then treats the wastewater at a microscopic level to remove organic matter. This is the job of microbes. They eat the organic matter, causing the wastewater to bubble. By this stage, the wastewater has been treated to a common standard, and most treatment plants would return the water to the river. But Blue Plains adds large amounts of oxygen and uses more microbes to remove nitrogen from the water. This is important because excess nitrogen feeds algae and other small waterborne plants, depleting the river's oxygen and making it impossible for fish and other river organisms to survive. Eventually, the wastewater, free of nitrogen, is filtered through sand and coal before being disinfected with chlorine and returned to the Anacostia. The Anacostia Riverkeeper Society monitors the nutrient and bacteria levels of the river and harnesses the use of trash traps to collect the litter that enters the river. The goal of these combined efforts? To make the Anacostia swimmable.
We want to lift that ban that was set back in 1972. The year of monitoring work that we've done has already gotten the district's attention. 2018 is when we documented that at least several days this year, the Anacostia River was safe to swim in most of the sites that we sampled.
Recently, this wouldn't have been possible, but the first half of the tunnel has already been put to work. It prevented 89% of overflows from going into the river. With these drastic improvements, the district must decide if people should be allowed to swim in the Anacostia River.
It's not always safe to swim. We need to be testing frequently. We need to be monitoring frequently. But people should be allowed to swim when it is safe. District government voluntarily opened the swim ban language on the Anacostia River. So as of August 2018, permitted swim events are allowed.
I've been involved with this work for decades now, and I can remember early on, they used to call those bags that would be blowing around all over the place, they would call them urban tumbleweed. One of the ways that problem was approached was a law that was passed here in the city that some people refer to it as a bag tax, but I like to really clear that up. It's a bag fee.
The D.C. legislation adds a 5-cent fee for every single-use bag. That's reduced the number of loose bags in D.C. by 80 to 90%. The revenue it's generated goes back to groups working to protect the river.
The bag fee money is what funds these boat tours, and these boat tours have gotten us speaking to literally thousands of people just in the past year and a half. So people are still using bags, they're still buying bags, but they're not dropping the bags in the environment anymore. That was almost textbook behavior change, and it was a really, really successful piece of legislation.
In the last few years, the city has successfully implemented legislation like the bag fee, making visible improvements to the river. But that has left many D.C. residents wondering, how will this change the landscape of the existing communities?
There are really two questions here when we're looking at the redevelopment of the Anacostia side of the river. One is it inevitable? And two is it good? And the cleanest river in the metropolitan area after a storm beginning in 5 years is going to be the Anacostia River because of all the improvements that are being made here. So this is going to be popular. I would say, yes, it's inevitable. Then the question is, if it's inevitable, is it good? And should we fight it?
As the health of the river rapidly improves, local groups are rushing to protect communities living along the river. Their hope is that the people who have lived in the area for decades will still be able to call Anacostia home when the river is at its cleanest.
My hopes for the environment for the Anacostia as well as DC in general is that the trajectory of being able to clean the river and the resources and be able to use it will keep on going. My other hope is that the city can leverage that type of interest in the river and be able to maintain a lot of affordable housing on the east side so that people who have traditionally lived here can continue to live here and enjoy the river once it's cleaned.
So how can you make a difference? In ways that you can, that are close and local. And you know, this river does have huge potential, but you have to keep working at it. You have to keep working and never give up. You don't have to go far. It's right here, right here. How can you make a difference? Right here, right now.
My dream would be, in my lifetime, to be able to fish and swim back in my beach, right here on the banks of the Anacostia at the mouth of Watts Branch. I would relish the opportunity to be able to do that again and see this river really become the cleanest river in the country, right here in Washington, D.C.
Do you draw the line between you and I? All that's broken on the riverside. Is it a natural state, how it's supposed to be? I think there's something that we just don't see. Clean rivers, it's not a dream. Clean rivers come eventually. It's not a new thing, it's been centuries. Old habits die hard, I think we'll all agree. It's now or never, you know, it's not too late. Change starts with us, it starts today. Clean rivers, it's not a dream. Clean rivers come eventually.